And there's two words that I'm hoping that you have learned other times in your English studies. Two different types of arguments. There's an implicit argument and an explicit argument. Let's start with this one. What's an explicit argument? What do you think it would be? What does it mean when you say something explicitly? There's two meanings for that.
Like a very clear argument.
Good, good, good. Clear, direct argument. This is the kind of argument that will state the thesis statement clearly. And it might not be at the very beginning. It might not be in 5-paragraph form and it's at the end of the intro. But it will state somewhere in that essay, the argument will be stated as very clearly and directly. So then, opposite, what's an implicit argument? Yeah, Nathan?
You're going to have to use context to understand what the argument is.
Perfect. Yeah, if this one is a clear and direct one, this is an unclear indirect argument. It doesn't mean that the argument isn't there. It just means that it might be like buried in some examples or some visual detail or in the tone itself. It's going to be in there somewhere. Anytime you're reading a novel and you're pulling out themes, we might call that an implicit argument, right? So like in a book that you've read, it might not just say the thesis of that book very clearly, but you still know kind of what the arguments of that book are. That's an implicit argument, right? And sometimes I think we get caught up on thinking that an argument is bad if it has bias, right? A lot of times we're evaluating an argument, and we're trying to decide how effectively this argument was conveyed, and we'll say, well, this argument wasn't very good because the author was clearly biased. What does bias mean, by the way? Yeah.
It just means you have a background that makes you think more in one direction than opposed to another.
Totally, that might be one of them, right? It might be something called like confirmation bias, where you've got a kind of background already that has led you to believe a certain thing, and so you are going to present information that is in line with your background and your experience. That's one kind of bias, yeah. What could another, by the way, what could another kind of bias be? What is another way you might be biased? Yeah.
You're probably one team and another team when you know somebody on one of the teams and figure biased due to the fact that you know someone or something.
Oh, awesome. Okay, this isn't exactly what I'm going to call it this, which is it's kind of like a belief bias, which basically means like you have certain beliefs about your team or about your person or whatever, and you're going to present information that is in line with those beliefs. Yeah. Any other kind of bias you can do? Yeah, Tate?
Maybe like experience the thing like the argument's about, so you're on a certain side because of it.
Oh, good. I don't have a name for this, but like it's like if you have lived that argument and your personal experience, it kind of goes with confirmation bias, right? Your personal experience has led you into a certain direction. You might be presenting information in line with that experience. Yeah, Emily?
Statistical bias.
What do you mean by that?
So like if you're getting a survey of a big group of people, if you didn't use an adequate type of survey, then it could swing the results in one way.
Yeah, totally. And along with statistical bias, there's so many other biases associated with surveys. Like let's say you present a question on your survey using very strong language, and a group of people answer a certain way only because of the language that you used in the question itself. I forgot. There's a name for that if somebody remembers from their stats class. No, okay. That's a kind of bias. Or a kind of bias which is called correlation, not causation, where you assume that because two things happen next to each other, that they caused each other, but they might not have, right? So what I'm saying here is there's a ton of kinds of biases, right? But let's think of the bias that Tate said. Bias based on like personal experience. Would it be wrong for someone to write an essay with an argument that is based on their personal experience? No, that's like what we write arguments about, right? Like, how could you have an argument or a point of view that is not based on your personal experience? It's biased, that's true, it's definitely biased, but I'm going to argue in here that all argumentation is biased. Every argument has a kind of bias. Everybody's coming through life through a kind of paradigm. They have a lens that they're looking at life through, right? And so whatever they are going to present is going to be biased in some way. So I'm going to give you an article here. Sorry, last piece of paper. I'm going to give you an article here that on the surface kind of looks straightforward. It's an argument about closing schools or not. And I just want you to read this. And as you're reading, underline words that you feel like show this author's bias.